sky. To whom do these celestial steeds belong? When you appear to us like gods on high, what brings you here to mystify?
Hi, good afternoon, and welcome to the Kate Valentine UFO Show, here with you on 1160 WVNJ. Our guests today, Lynn Picknett and Clive Prince, are the authors of a most interesting book, The Stargate Conspiracy, The Truth About Extraterrestrial Life and the Mysteries of Ancient Egypt. So, welcome to the show, both of you. Thank you so much for being here today.
Thanks for having us on, Kate. Thank you.
Hello. Hi, it's a pleasure.
Well, as I mentioned to you in emails and on the phone, your book is so condensed and so full of so much information, it's going to be difficult to cover it all in just an hour, but we will try. And I just thought it might be interesting to start with a little bit of a quote from your book, and that is, "Nothing succeeds like Egypt. Although its fabled magic and mystery have by now become something of a well-worn cliché, it is largely only academic historians who lament that fact. Something about the land of Tutankhamun, the Sphinx, and the Great Pyramid instantly dwarfs all other cultures in our imaginations." And that's true, and that's remained true. And I guess, is that how you started to investigate this so-called Stargate conspiracy?
Well, actually, it was something left over from our previous book, which was called The Templar Revelation, which incidentally was the inspiration for the Da Vinci Code. And we traced the beginnings. It is a huge topic, Kate, which I'm going to cover in 3 seconds. But we were looking at the end of the book into the origins of Christianity, and we saw that Christianity actually had a foothold in Egypt, in the Egyptian religion. And we had a lot of material left over from that book, which we basically, it wasn't appropriate to keep in that book. So we thought, well, we'll write another book. We were going to write a book about ancient Egypt, but once we started looking at Egypt, we got a bit fixated on modern Egypt, or rather the Egypt of 1998, when we were writing it. And we were just fascinated by the various vested interests, the various groups of people who were just homing in on Egypt and its what they thought of as its message for the millennium.
And so you feel that there's a conspiracy there, and I understand that. But what exactly were you referring to as Stargate? That was a question that I had for you.
Well, Stargate. I mean, we chose the title, The Stargate Conspiracy, because we had to call this conspiracy that we had uncovered something. And this, these words, the word or the two words, Stargate, just seem to run through everything. And to be honest, when we originally started writing the book, it was very much a working title, because we thought, well, the people that do the Stargate movies and TV show won't let us use it. But in the end, our publishers liked it, so we kind of went with it, because it does actually sum up this very kind of complex conspiracy that we were that we'd uncovered, that covers a lot of different areas. So, as an umbrella term, Stargate seems to crop up a lot. When you're just talking about ancient Egyptian mythology, there's this fact that the ancient Egyptians used the same word for star and gateway, as if they looked upon stars as some kind of portal. The subjects that we covered actually went into some of the U.S. government paranormal research projects. Most people probably know about the famous remote viewing projects that the Pentagon and CIA were carrying out in the 1970s. And one of those they gave the code name Stargate to. So the word kept cropping up, and we thought, well, we need a short word for this thing that we're talking about. Stargate seemed to be the one, because it covers that whole sort of multitude of very kind of weird coming together of different things that we were looking at. But essentially, the conspiracy we were talking about was one that is there to essentially use and manipulate and use that potent symbolism that ancient Egypt has, the one in the quote that you opened with, everyone gets so kind of turned on by Egypt. It's such a potent subject. But it also means whenever you've got something potent like that, there are people that want to exploit that symbolism and the excitement that comes from it.
Well, yes, you mentioned so many different groups, but you always come back to that one group, the 9. And I think perhaps you might want, before, you might want to touch on that a little bit too, because you're right, there are so many people with vested interest in this Egyptian culture that's still there. What's interesting too is that not many people, I shouldn't say that, but I guess what I'm trying to say is that these pyramids are there, obviously built by someone or something, and no one really has a good handle on that yet. And so all these various groups seem to, because of the fact that no one does know for sure how they were created, they then use whatever sort of myth of creation that they want to further their own aims. That seems to be what you're trying to say.
Well, yeah, I mean, Kate, before we go any further, I have to say that when we first saw the Great Pyramid at Cairo, Egypt, I mean, basically our jaws were on the ground.
Really?
Because, you're prepared for something that's big and peculiar and bizarre, but you're not prepared for something that big and that bizarre. You stand sort of on the sand next to it, and you wrench your head further and further back trying to see the top, and you can't. And there's all these tons and tons of rock, and you go inside, and your brain skids on it. You think, what is this for? You've never come across anything like this before. So in that sense, it's alien. But a lot of people say, oh, it's so peculiar and so inexplicable, aliens must have built it. That's not what we think. We just think that the secret, has not been uncovered totally yet as to what exactly it was for. I mean, obviously there are lots of theories, and the standard line is, it was sort of a mausoleum, basically, but, there's lots of questions about that. But the thing is that the what we have left of the ancient Egyptian civilization is just incredibly fascinating and intriguing, because you can't really explain. You can't look at it and say, oh, well, but that's obvious, that's for that, and that's for that. It's just, it's just absolutely mind-boggling. So obviously, as Clive was saying, ancient Egyptian civilization has this enormous sort of pull on modern people, because there are very few answers that actually satisfy all the questions. But because there is this. I mean, the Great Pyramid is such a symbol. It's easy to draw. It's basically a triangle. The pyramid. Everybody recognizes it. And you just think, what is it? But it just does something to the mind. You look at it and you think, wow. So, basically, just, as I say, we're writing the book just before the millennium, and there was a huge amount of activity surrounding it, surrounding the Egyptian pyramids and the whole idea of Egypt. And basically, we uncovered an extraordinary plot, and that's not too strong a word, a conspiracy indeed, that actually had covered, I mean, this is amazing, 50 years, basically, to create a belief system, if you like, a new religion, based on ancient Egyptian ideas. I mean, basically to take and use and manipulate ancient Egyptian ideas to provide a new, quote, religion for the new millennium. Now, that actually hasn't happened because various other things didn't happen. But, nevertheless, the people behind it were, guess who? The CIA, the American military, and for all we know, the British military, because there is some hints that there are, the British intelligence agency is also involved. We actually knew somebody, we worked with somebody who was involved, so yes, that's true. So basically using the whole idea of the ancient Egyptian religion based on the 9 gods that they had, known as the Ennead. The idea of this basically was a channeling group through various channelers over a period of 50 years. It included Uri Geller in his day, it included various other people, it included, the Pentagon was funding some of this. It infiltrated various channeling groups. It set up various channeling groups. And the whole idea was that the ancient Egyptian gods are back and telling us what to do.
Well, were the Egyptians themselves involved in that?
In the sense of the modern Egyptian government?
Yes.
You mean? Probably there, because there's a whole lot of stuff. I don't know if people remember that in the years leading up to the millennium, there was a whole lot of activity going around and people writing books and having conferences about all these allegedly discoveries in Egypt that had been suppressed, and there was a whole lot of politics happening, which is where we kind of got interested, because as Lynn said, we were writing this book about the history, ancient Egypt, but at the time when all these claims were being made that people had discovered things and secret chambers beneath the Sphinx and secret rooms in the pyramid. So we went to try and sort of find out if there's any truth to these rumours, and what we found is basically there weren't. But people were using these rumours as a way of kind of getting people excited and interested and looking towards Egypt, really for the millennium. People will probably remember this whole fuss about a thing called the Hall of Records that was supposed to be hidden under the Sphinx, and that it's not just that it's got the records of the ancient Egyptian civilization. It's also that when this room was discovered and these records were found, it would somehow trigger momentous events in the modern world. It would trigger a new age. And we actually found that this whole belief and expectation was really being built up kind of out of nothing, it has to be said, in order to prepare people for changes that people wanted to kind of bring in.
Okay.
In kind of a new religion based on this concept of the ancient Egyptian gods being back.
Okay.
Ancient Egyptian gods being extraterrestrial in nature as well.
Okay. Well, I'll tell you, Clive, right now we're going to have to take a quick break, but we will get back right afterwards to this ancient Egyptian religion and the Aeneid, because I think that's very important to your theory. Kate Valentine speaking with Lynn Picknett and Clive Prince. They are the authors of The Stargate Conspiracy. We're on 1160 WVNJ. As always, we welcome you to join our conversation. Post your thoughts on our website at AtlanticCoastUFOs.com. After the show, if you wish to have further information, please go to the Stargate Assembly's online forum at TemplarLodge.com. We'll be right back. Hi, welcome back to the Kate Valentine UFO Show on 1160 WVNJ. Our guests today are Clive Prince and Lynn Picknett, and they are talking about their book, The Stargate Conspiracy, which covers the truth about extraterrestrial life and the mysteries of ancient Egypt. So welcome back, you guys. Now, just before, and I'm sorry this is getting a little broken up, but you were talking about the 9 reflecting the Aeneid, the ancient Egyptian religion, if I'm correct, and that these were actually considered to be extraterrestrial? Or am I mixing metaphors here?
I'm not sure in modern terminology the Egyptians did consider the gods to be extraterrestrial in the sense that we would.
Okay.
It's perhaps more of a sort of poetic term to the Egyptians. The gods were certainly considered to be starry beings, and they had connections with the star Sirius, for example, but there's no real suggestion that they came from there, if you see what I mean. That they all came from there. One of the gods, for example, was represented the firmament, in other words, the atmosphere around the Earth. They all have their functions, and I think we, at our peril, we think of the ancient Egyptian gods as being literally extraterrestrials. I think, to some extent at least, it was a poetic term.
Yeah, I think you're correct. I don't even know if people at that time even thought about extraterrestrial beings. I mean, I think they were concerned with their own life here on Earth more than anything else. It just seems to me. But so why do you feel that there's a conspiracy of the Nine today?
Well, just to give perhaps a bit more background on this, what we mean by the Nine, or the Council of Nine, which a lot of your listeners would have heard of, I'm sure, but perhaps not all. This is something actually started way back in the 1950s, and in the early 1950s, that there was a group of researchers in a paranormal lab in Maine, basically researching mediumship, and they had in a medium who started to channel some entities that called themselves the Nine Principles. And at that point, they just seemed to be, traditional kind of spirit intelligences. But that started a whole series of events that, if you put it together one way, actually looks very much like something kind of paranormal was going on. That after this first channeler, who was an Indian mystic, after he went out of the picture, other people started channeling what seemed to be the same entities, and this went on and on over the course of 50 years. It's still going on to this day. And some of the other channelers that came in touch with this Nine were people like, as Lynn said, Uri Geller, various other people. Gene Roddenberry was involved in this group at one point, the guy that created Star Trek. And when we first started to look at this story, it looks as if, there was this ongoing series of communications with this group called the Nine, these entities called the Nine, being channeled through different people. And then there was a point in the mid-1970s, and it was actually in when Gene Roddenberry was involved, and he actually asked the channeler of that time, who used to channel this entity called Tom, actually, who are you? Who are you, and who are the Nine? And then finally, and this is like 25 years after the thing started, this entity, Tom, announced, actually, we're the Nine gods of ancient Egypt, because the religion of ancient Egypt, the religion of the pyramid builders, was based upon 9 gods, with the supreme creator god being a god called Atum. And Tom said, actually, I'm not Tom, I'm Atum. The Nine, we are the gods of ancient Egypt. We're actually extraterrestrial intelligences, and we're about to come back. That's a very exciting story when you put it together that way. But the more we investigated this, the more we kind of smelt a rat. Because over that entire period, the key figure in this is a guy, a paranormal researcher and a medical doctor called Andrea Puharich, who was the kind of leader of this group, and who was responsible for finding the channelers. We began to suspect that he was manipulating the whole thing through various means, including hypnosis and electrical means. And the reason that all these communications over this period of time seem so consistent, it's because he was making sure they were. Essentially, he was the puppet master making these things happen. So we began to, as I say, smell a rat about that. The thing that kind of began to make us even more concerned about it was we actually realized that how the connections or the extent of the influence that the Nine had. The other thing also we discovered about Puharich was that all the time he was allegedly, supposedly this straightforward paranormal researcher working in a private research foundation, first in Maine and then in other places. We actually discovered his background was actually working with the Pentagon and with the CIA on the notorious MK-Ultra mind control experiments of the 1950s and 60s. He was part of that at the very same time that these communications with the Nine were going on. So we began to think, maybe there's more, it's not a straightforward picture, but this is actually part of some kind of either psychological experiment or mind control experiment, or an attempt to actually sort of create and capture a new belief system around this idea of the gods of ancient Egypt were extraterrestrials, but more importantly that they're about to return. And this, the people involved with this group over the decades were some very prominent individuals. The very first funder of this project had been vice president under Roosevelt. It involved members of some of the richest families in the country, the Astor family, the Forbes family, all of whom were kind of listening to these channeled messages. And I mean, one other person that was involved in it at one point or connected with it was, for example, Al Gore. And we just think the level that this, most people, when you think of like channeled extraterrestrial or UFO, if you want to use the word cults, but or groups, you tend to think of them as being just small things that happen here and there in different places. But this was a very concerted effort to create a consistent message, a consistent belief system, and get some very powerful individuals to believe at this and act on it. Which is why we wrote the book, to kind of sound this warning, because so many people were taking these 9 channelings absolutely seriously and at face value. But when we point out that in the background to all this, you've actually got Pentagon and CIA psychological warfare contractors involved in this, we're really saying that you need to be a bit careful when you hear these messages. There's probably more to them, there's another level to them that makes them very, very sinister.
So you're almost saying like there's a scheme on to sort of make a one world government through the just using one world religion type of thing?
In part, it's an important thing in our research was to come across a report that was made back in the 70s, the early 70s, by a government, not really a think tank, an organisation called SRI International. It was a defence and intelligence contractor kind of research organisation that, for example, did the CIA remote viewing experiments and things like that. This organisation kept coming up in our research, often in the strangest connections, things to do with research in Egypt, and they were some of the people that were supposedly looking for hidden things in Egypt. But they did a report in I think 1973 in the 60s. You had the whole kind of counterculture and hippie movement that really changed American society, and the government commissioned SRI to do this report to say what's going on. Their report concluded that all these changes that happened throughout the 60s that had kind of challenged traditional ideas of authority, traditional institutions, eroded trust in politicians and the government, all these changes were unstoppable. And it also eroded trust in traditional religious institutions. And it concluded that these things are basically unstoppable. So the only thing that the powers that be could do to contain this was, instead of trying to stop it, was to take control of it. And the method of taking control of it was to establish essentially a new set of beliefs, a new religion, based much more on sort of 1960s counterculture ideas. And basically that's what we think that this the Council of Iron was about.
But sorry.
Yeah.
Well, Lynn,
I'm just going.
Okay, we're just going. I don't hold that thought, please, because we're going to have to take a quick commercial break, and I don't want to interrupt you right in the middle of it. But yeah, definitely. Kate Valentine here. I am speaking to Lynn Picknett and Clive Prince about their book, The Stargate Conspiracy. We welcome your comments. Please post them at AtlanticCoastUFOs.com. And after the show, and correct me if I'm wrong, Lynn, but I think they can get in touch with you and discuss these thoughts with other people on the Stargate Assembly at TemplarLodge.com. Is that correct?
Actually, no. But when we come back after the break, we'll give you a new address.
Terrific. Thank you. We'll be right back. Hi, welcome back to the Kate Valentine UFO Show on 1160 WVNJ, where our guests are Clive Prince and Lynn Picknett. And Lynn, I'm sorry, I think I had to interrupt you just before the break, but please go ahead. And Clive, I'd really like to know the more recent address that people can find out a little bit more information about all this.
Right, well, I was just going to say, just when you think, you've got it all sort of sussed out, and you think, right, the whole story of the Nine, the Council of Nine, was basically a put-up job. It was all fabricated by the intelligence agencies.
Mm-hmm. Hello?
To it. The other level is that the doctor that Clive was talking about, Dr. Andrei Puharich, who was behind the development of this story through the various mediums and the various channeling groups. I've got a quote here about him. He didn't doubt that discarnate intelligences exist any more than he doubted that finite carnate intelligences exist. He did believe that contact with the real Ennead was possible. So even though perhaps quite, to an outsider, when we first started looking at this, we thought, oh, well, he just invented the entire thing and he made people believe in it for his own reasons or for the intelligence agency's reasons. But actually, he himself was utterly convinced that one day they would get in touch with the real Ennead, the real nine gods of Egypt. He totally believed in that, and he did a lot of work with shamans, with tribal shamans, who through various techniques apparently get in touch with the gods and bring back messages. So his background was that they used various things like hallucinogenic mushrooms, and he employed that. He employed, as Clive said, hypnosis with the various groups. I think that there's an element, he was desperately trying to get the real thing, but actually, at the same time, he was not above kind of faking it. And there is, in the history of parapsychology, there was this theory called artifact induction, which is the idea that if you're trying to get some kind of phenomenon, like rats on a tabletop in a séance, then one of the ways of actually literally kick-starting it is to push the table secretly, and everybody sitting around thinks, oh, it moved, it's the real thing, it's the spirit moving it, when in fact it was just one of you kicking it secretly. But the idea is that after that, you get the real thing. It's like it opens up the portals to the real thing. So was Puharich actually deliberately faking stuff in order to get the real thing?
And then the question that comes from that, given the fact that he's working for, the usual suspects, is definitely working for on CIA projects and Pentagon projects, Defense Department projects. The question then is, if he's really trying to do this, who's he doing it for? Who's he trying to put in contact with these things? There's a very scary dimension to this whole thing that we write about, and we don't pretend to have all the answers on this either, because it is a very complicated story, and because so much of it is secret, because so much of it is deliberately kept hidden. We don't think we pieced everything together, but what we're hoping is that other people will look at the book and take their own research on, look at some of these things and add to the story.
Well, one of the things adding to the story that you seem to have discounted is the Egyptian-Mars connection, too. And that is very much up in the air. I mean, there's certainly, as you said, Richard Hoagland was one of the initial pushers of the face on Mars. And that is, some people still believe in it. NASA certainly does not. But it is interesting, if I recall, and I may be recalling incorrectly, that of the potential pyramids on Mars, that there were 9 of them. Is that correct, or am I just remembering incorrectly?
Off the top of my head, I can't remember. I didn't think it was that many. But, the conclusion we came to about things like the face on Mars in our book, and this whole belief that came around again in the lead up to the millennium during the 1990s, not just that there are mysterious apparently artificial structures on Mars that were put there by some ancient civilization. That's one thing. But the fact that this attempts to try and link this with ancient Egypt, and various writers were doing this at the time, including Richard Hoagland. And our position on that is very much that there are certain things on Mars that need to be looked at because they do look very weird. Strangely enough, the face isn't one of them. I think the face was just something that by chance happened to look like a face. But there are these pyramids that were things that look like pyramid structures in another area of Mars that no one's really looked at anymore. In some ways, the whole face on Mars debate drew attention away from the more interesting things. So we're not saying that there are no mysteries to Mars. People are making a mystery out of nothing. What we're saying is people are taking a genuine mystery and hijacking it to serve another agenda. And part of that was these attempts to show that there's a connection between the mysteries of Mars and the mysteries of ancient Egypt. And when you get down and look at them, those arguments just fall apart very, very easily. They're very, very contrived, very weak arguments. In our view, and for reasons that we point out in the book, that people are just desperately, a whole lot of people are desperately trying to make these connections in order to make other people believe in these connections, really to widen the picture out from just talking about the mysteries of ancient Egypt, to add this extraterrestrial dimension, which obviously you can do if you make a link with another planet, and to take it on from there. So basically, although we think there are some things on Mars that certainly need to be looked at, and certainly mysteries there, the actual connection between Mars and ancient Egypt, we think, was basically there isn't one, to put it bluntly, and disappointingly in a way.
Yeah,
yeah, exactly. I mean, and as Sherlock Holmes would say, too many people are theorizing ahead of the data.
It's true. Well, I think to that point too, we had an interesting thing too. With Chris wrote in and he says it seems natural to believe the pyramids were built by extraterrestrials because we haven't discovered any evidence that Earthlings were capable of this enormous construction. But if they were here, where are in that capacity? Where are they now? But to your credit, I think you think that, well, listen, humanity could have put these up. We don't always need ETs. But I don't.
Absolutely. I mean, I think a lot of these theories really kind of are great put downs to humanity and what humanity is capable of. Nobody knows how the pyramids were built. We don't know, but my feeling is that we'll find, when the mystery is solved, we'll find that it was the ancient Egyptians themselves had some kind of knowledge that we've lost, some kind of advanced technology that they developed themselves. I think it's just, they were ahead of the time.
Well, that's very possible. And Clive, I think we're having a little trouble picking you up on the air. If you could just speak up a little. Thank you. I appreciate it.
Yes,
Thank you very much.
Okay. Is that any better? Yeah.
Yep, that is, yes.
Yeah.
But so what do you think about all these pyramids? I know your interest is a little bit less in pyramids as such and more as what they are as a symbol. But what do you really think about the pyramids? I've never had the pleasure of being there, and I was just wondering if you had any theories about them or what their importance was. And it doesn't seem to be that they were, to me, and I'd like you to address this, that they really had much to do with the ancient Egyptian religions. Like the temples, for example, in Greece, obviously were related directly to the Greek religions, but this seems to be like in and of itself, and not related to much else.
Yes, it's true. I mean, one of the striking things about the Great Pyramid is how undecorated and uncarved it is. You go to any other place in Egypt, any other temple, and they cover every bit of wall space with hieroglyphs and pictures and things. when you go to the Great Pyramid and you stand in the King's Chamber in the middle, there's nothing there to tell you why they did it, and that that is immediately striking as a very odd thing. It actually looks different to most other things in Egypt.
Yeah, and it's always assumed. Well, I say always assumed by a great many people, usually academics actually, that it had to be a burial chamber, a very obviously elaborate burial chamber. But all the other burial chambers that you come across in Egypt, as Clive said, not just temples but burial chambers, they were covered. The walls are covered in murals because they had to be, because the idea was that you wrote the spells, you drew the spells on the wall that would actually see the person buried there into the afterlife. So to remind them, so they had something to read, a sort of crib sheet. I've forgotten what it is, but there you are. It's on the wall, so I can say it in the I can read it off and get myself through the afterlife safely. But in the pyramids, there's nothing. There's actually nothing on the walls. And what it comes down to is basically nobody really knows. Nobody knows what. I mean, lots of people say they know. Actually, nobody really knows what the pyramids were for. There's certainly a sort of broken, it's called a sarcophagus in the King's Chamber. It hasn't got a lid, but it's sort of a bit broken. I mean, I presume it did have a lid, but it's sort of a granite. It looks like a sort of granite coffin. But I mean, it's got all the hallmarks of some kind of, extremely elaborate, obviously, and very costly, sort of initiation sort of chamber. But that's just trying to see it from our perspective now. I mean, there may have been something in the ancient Egyptian religion that was truly alien in the normal sense, so different from what we understand now that we can't get a handle on it, even if somebody told us. It is very, very different. But, when we look at something like the Great Pyramid, I'm afraid, we don't think it's only natural to think that extraterrestrials built it. We think it's only natural to think, gosh, isn't humanity wonderful? Weren't these people thousands of years ago absolutely brilliant?
Well, I tend to agree with you too, but again, unfortunately, Lynn, you always seem to come in at break time. But I want to get back to pyramids a little bit after that. So, Kate Valentine, I'm speaking with Lynn Picknett and Clive Prince. They are the authors of this very interesting and very deep book, Stargate Conspiracy. We're on 1160 WVNJ, and as always, we welcome you to join in. You can post your thoughts or your comments on our website, AtlanticCoastUFOs.com. And after the show, Lynn, where would they go to find out more information? Well, we'll find out as soon as we get back. Hi, welcome back to the Kate Valentine UFO Show on 1160 WVNJ. Our guests today are Lynn Picknett and Clive Prince, the authors of the Stargate Conspiracy. We'd love to hear what you're thinking. Post your comments at AtlanticCoastUFOs.com. And Lynn, before I forget it again, where can people go to find out other information about this book and your other books?
Right, well, you can contact us through our website, which is Picknett Prince, that's all one word, .com. So I'm going to spell that now.
Good.
That's PicknettPrince.com.
Great. Well, we had a question that came in from Dale, which was exactly what I was going to ask you, too. Dale said, do you think the pyramids in South America and Mexico are related to the ones in Egypt? And were they built for the same purpose? And I think as well, they've discovered some potential pyramids on Mars. And it begins to make you think if maybe someone other than humans were here and just left these as, just sort of a sign that we were here. I have to start thinking that. It seems like, like as a visitor to another place, you sometimes leave a memento.
Well, yeah.
That would be one hell of a memento, I guess. But what do you think? Almost like the monolith in Odyssey and so on. Do you think it has any relationship, or is it just coincidental?
The honest answer is, I don't know any more than anybody else. I think both things are possible. In terms of, say, is there a connection with the pyramids in South America? They appear to be from completely different times. They weren't built, they weren't built at the same time. So, and there are obvious differences. The American ones tend to have big steps going up them. My own feeling is there's not necessarily a connection between them, because let's face it, you've only got so many shapes to build with, and building a pyramid is a nice shape. There's something inherently pleasing about a pyramid shape. So if two cultures use something that is, build buildings that are the same shape, doesn't mean that one got it from the other, or that the same people built both. It just means two cultures found this, the geometry of creating this thing equally pleasing, for the same kind of reasons. But when it comes to the pyramids on Mars, it's not yet been absolutely proven that those structures are pyramids, but they look very much like them. So it would be interesting to have a closer study of those, because I don't think it's been decades since those photographs were taken. But again, it wouldn't necessarily, even if they did turn out to be artificial created pyramids built either by Martians or somebody else, it doesn't necessarily mean there's a connection with the pyramids of Egypt, because it is just it's a shape that they're not just a pleasing shape, but a potent shape.
Yes, and although obviously we're not engineers, but it occurs to me that pyramids were a way of building high buildings way before the advent of mega cranes, of modern building materials and equipment. If you stack up so much stone at an angle, you can actually get quite high. But without doing that, you couldn't have tall buildings. So it was one way of having tall buildings. So it must have occurred to virtually every, major civilization on Earth that, if they wanted to build tall buildings, the idea in general presumably being that they wanted to reach as far as possible to the sky, to the firmament, to the stars, then that's the only way they could have built tall buildings.
Yeah, that's a very good point. It could, because it seems that regardless of conspiracies or religions or whatever, there always seems to be a human sort of desire to reach for the stars. I think that's almost international.
Absolutely, yes, something that every culture, I think, has shared. But all the things we're talking about here, the theories of how it was built, how they were built, why they were built, what the connections between different cultures, pyramids are, these are great things to talk about and exciting things to talk about. The message of the Stargate Conspiracy is not that we're going to say there are no mysteries to any of this, and that we shouldn't be talking about them. Quite the opposite. We should be exchanging ideas. What we got nervous about was when various people were not just saying there's a mystery here, but they were coming saying, and we're going to tell you what the answer is. And certainly during the late 90s, there was, particularly when it came to the mysteries of ancient Egypt, it actually seemed that there was, people weren't just discussing different theories and different ideas, but there was one solution that was being imposed on everybody that you couldn't deviate from, about why the pyramids were built, what their meaning was. That was another reason we wrote the book at the time, was to say, come on, there are lots of other theories here that ought to be talked about, but there was this thing that you could only actually talk about it in one way. There was this whole idea that it was all connected with a specific year, which was 10,500 BC, and any kind of alternative theory that came up that didn't fit into that wasn't being given a platform. So it's not so much, we love talking about the theories and the ideas and the possibilities. We get worried when somebody turns up and says, and I know the answer. And I know the answer because it was channeled in, that's where we get nervous.
Well, I tell you, we had another comment that came in from Night Sky, and I think this sort of addresses one of your issues too, and that was, has your research in Egypt been helped by the new government there? Because he's read that Dr. Hawass tended to block research from time to time. And I guess we could go on about an hour on that subject. Really, but it's interesting that governments tend to be very jealous of their secrets.
Well, they do, and of course, governments, certainly the West, as far as we know, have a great many secrets. Some of which, make you go cold if you begin to suspect what's going on. And I'm not talking about just conspiracy theories for the sake of it, but as we talk about in our book, it is absolutely without doubt. The facts are there that the American military, the American intelligence agencies were actually funded an awful lot of this rather sinister Dr. Puharich's work with the alleged, the channeling of the nine, of the alleged gods of ancient Egypt, and indeed the British intelligence were involved as well. So those are the kind of secrets that you can kind of uncover to a certain extent, which we have. And I know we've got just a couple of minutes left. I just want to say that I don't want your listeners to think that we are skeptics with a capital S. We're absolutely not. Between us, we've seen UFOs, we've heard and seen ghosts, we've taken part in big parapsychological experiments. We are totally open-minded and indeed believers that the unexplained does happen. But where it comes down to the facts, we tend to stick to the facts because that's on safe ground.
Yeah, that's, and I think in paranormal research, sometimes people do get away from the facts. They do have their pet theories, and they do, well, I guess that's human too. I mean, we all have pet theories about whatever, and we try to look for what sort of backs those theories up. And,
it does happen, yeah. But I think, the reputation that Lynn and I have is not just that we challenge the conventions and we challenge the orthodoxy, but we also challenge the alternative viewpoints as well, and that is often what gets us in more trouble than questioning, challenging the status quo.
Well, you could always hide out in a pyramid somewhere.
Well, we will.
The trouble we got in overwriting the Stargate Conspiracy, it's just of not being given platforms on conferences anymore and all that kind of thing. Real commercial pressure was put on us. It got quite bad at one point. That basically because we were challenging some of the big figures in the alternative field. Not that we were challenging academics and things, but we were actually questioning some of the theories and the work of some of the big names in the alternative field, and they don't like it, and we still don't. They still don't. It's still difficult for us in certain things to get conference platforms and so on, because there are certain people that won't go to a conference if we're on the bill. Others won't appear on a conference, and will put pressure on to have us taken off, that kind of thing. Ooh. So it wasn't, Was it worth it? I don't know. Our smartest career move writing that book. But it's something we had to do. And the great thing is people are still talking about it. People are still reading it. The book's still around now, and people like yourself are giving us the chance still to talk about it.
Well, and all of your work has been backed up by fact. You have quite a good bibliography in the end, and I would say if people doubt what you're saying, read your book and then do their own research, right?
Oh, thank you. That's it. We always provide the references so that if we say something, people can check what we say, check our facts, and if they disagree, they can disagree. A lot of people that write the kind of books in the same field don't actually provide you with that information. They just give you one side. So, we try and give as much information as we possibly can so that people can check us.
Well, you certainly did that, and unfortunately, the hour has come to an end. Thank you so much for taking this time to chat with us.
Oh, thank you.
It's been fun. And thanks as always to Bill and Dave. Thanks to our sponsors. Most of all, thank you, our listeners. Remember, you can always get this show again on podcast or YouTube. And we'll be with you next Friday at 1. And our guest then will be Matt Forbeck. And he's going to be having a great book. And the title of the book is Star Trek versus Star Wars. Get ready for some trivia questions. And until next Friday, remember to keep your eye on the sky. Bye.